Okay, well, good evening and welcome to this evening's meeting of Citizens for Informed Land Use. We are fortunate to have with us Dr. Scott Cascone, Superintendent of Schools in the Holmdel Public School District. I'm Julie Roth, the current president of CELU, and I have with me tonight Alicia Unasan, RG Malonis, and Mary Rose Little on tech support and backup. Thank you for joining us this evening. So CELU is a community organization founded in 1998. This is our 25th year. And we work to preserve Holmdel's farmland and other open spaces and to protect the natural resources of our town, particularly the Swimming River Reservoir. Our mission is also to give citizens the information they need to advocate for good government to ensure we are effective at protecting the town that we love. CELU follows issues in town to identify what effects they will have on our quality of life in Holmdel. Currently, we are watching the development plans being presented for the former Vonage and former Inverness properties on the southern side of Holmdel, properties firmly within the watershed of the Swimming River Reservoir. We are also monitoring Holmdel's plans for stormwater management as flooding is becoming more persistent in the northern part of our town. This evening, we are happy to have with us a dedicated steward of our schools. Education is important to all Holmdel residents, whether you have children in the schools, you had children in the schools, or you just enjoy being part of a town with a highly regarded school system. So with a 25-year career in education, Dr. Cascone, a bilingual leader, started as a volunteer English teacher in Costa Rica, fostering a commitment to student growth. Holding a bachelor's in international affairs, he evolved from a Spanish and ESL teacher to roles like assistant principal, and superintendent, emphasizing collaborative and innovative environments. Earning a master's in teaching and a doctorate in education, his leadership focuses on strategic planning, curriculum design, and adult learning. Dr. Cascone, driven by a love of learning, balances his professional life with reading, writing, fitness, and cherishing family moments, embodying a life dedicated to service and lifelong learning. We are so grateful that he has taken time out of his very busy schedule to present for us the district's recently released 5-year strategic plan and its vision for our district. So if you have questions for Dr. Cascone following his presentation, we ask that you please put them in the Q&A. And you can ask tough questions. I have a feeling he can take it. But keep in mind that I will only be reading questions that are respectfully stated. Okay, so thank you, Dr. Cascone, for all you do for our children, and welcome.
Thank you so much, and thank you to CELU and the CELU board for the opportunity to join the meeting and share some information about the strategic plan. And thank you also to all of the community members in attendance this evening. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Everyone can see that? Okay. So I thought I would just start off by talking a little bit about sort of the impetus for this project and the process itself before getting into the plan a little bit. And I'll tell you that my intention is not to go point by point through the plan, but rather just kind of make some high level points about it, and then really would be happy to engage in a robust question and answer about it. When I started in Holmdel, the Board of Education and I began conversations fairly early on about the prospect of engaging in a 5-year strategic action plan process. It seemed like an opportune time to do so, having just come out of the pandemic and recognizing the unique challenges that presented, as well as just how it kind of changed our view in many ways about how we operated as a school system, how we needed to operate as a school system moving forward, but also just in terms of Holmdel's history, having gone through a couple of transitions and superintendents, and while having completed some really visionary and innovative work with the $40 million referendum, it had been some time since the district had really engaged in a process like this. And so the board and I did some research on various providers and ultimately landed on a organization named PLC Associates, which has decades of experience doing this type of work and has literally done thousands of strategic action plans across the country in virtually every state. The process was, I would argue, a truly inclusive process. There were a number of quite comprehensive surveys that were administered to all stakeholder groups, including parents and guardians, the at-large community of Holmdel, our staff, both certificated and non-certificated staff, and last but not least, to students in grades 5 through 12. We also conducted focus groups with those same stakeholder groups, and of course did a comprehensive mining of our own internal data, whether that was surveys that had been previously administered and obviously our student achievement data. Following the compilation of all that data, we convened and the identification of our 4 strategic intents, which I'll go into some more detail on a bit later. We formed 4 task force groups. These were essentially work groups. And each of these task force groups was also made up of multiple stakeholders, including members of our parent community, administration, staff, and we also had a board member participation on those task force groups. And those task forces were charged with the task of taking the data and then developing action plans for each of our strategic intent areas out of them. We completed that process early this past summer, worked on refining and getting the plan to a published quality, public-facing document, and we launched it really at the very beginning of this school year, which actually synced up very nicely with the setting of our district goals, and then obviously the goals that trickle down from there to our administrator goals, our school goals, and our classroom goals, or what are sometimes called student growth objectives. And this, for the next 5 years, that will continue to drive that annual goal setting process. And just a final point on kind of the preface and the lead up, my first, let's call it 6 months in the district, it was apparent to me that there were a lot of great ideas coming from our stakeholders. There was a lot of feedback. And it was, it was sort of coming in catch as catch can, right? And we were responding to it in sort of more of a reactive fashion, as opposed to a strategic fashion. And that was another thing that sort of led me to believe that having a strategic plan into which this feedback was incorporated was going to be really powerful for our district for the next 5 years in order to help us be consistent and clear in our goal setting. And to, as the plan aspires to take us from our current state, which was sort of defined by the various surveys and focus groups, and take us to what, as a community, we identified as our desired state. So with that preface, just share my. You can still see my screen?
Yes.
Okie doke. It's in PDF. Hey, let me see if I can. I apologize. Let me see if it's not allowing me to scroll the PDF. Can you see that or no? Can you see where it says?
Yes, we can see our mission.
Our mission. Perfect. Okay. So it really, it started with, at a high level with really looking, teasing out key concepts and key values that were emerging from these various data sets, which we had gathered, whether that was qualitative feedback through focus groups or through surveys. And we arrived at a revised mission statement, which you can see here. And a couple of things that I think jump out about it are, the idea of one of the things that emerged from the feedback was this idea of excellence, right? That Holmdel prided itself on a history of excellence in its school district. So we wanted to make sure that was reflected within the mission statement. What also emerged was the idea of relationships, and whether those were internal between professional colleagues or between the school district and parents, that building strong relationships was key to us being able to achieve as a community what we wanted to achieve. Some other key points you'll see that come out are the idea of celebrating our unique differences as a community, and the importance of both teamwork and cooperation. Just bear with me one moment here. It was also really important that we established shared beliefs and guiding values. Also, all of which really our task forces really, combed through the focus group feedback, the survey responses, to identify shared beliefs that would guide our efforts as well as guiding values. Again, you can see this idea of excellence, positive relationships, but also innovation. We, also what came through in our feedback was a real pride in the history of this community, and its history of scientific innovation and discovery. And so that was really important to keep in our shared beliefs. And the importance of treating all with respect, honoring all voices, and valuing all contributions. And that's something that definitely came out of our surveys and our focus groups, was the need to really recommit ourselves to that. And our guiding values of, really at kind of a real high level: growth, relationships, innovation, inclusion, and teamwork. And I actually have to acknowledge Dr. Irwin, who kind of came up with the acronym and designed this sort of infographic with the the superscript for grit with the exponent there. So we identified 4 strategic charges. You can call them categories, you can call them buckets, if you will. And those were organizational systems, climate and culture, family and community engagement and partnerships, and teaching and learning. And so just a couple of high-level points on each of these. With organizational systems, these are really focused primarily on our human capital and our human resources. So our recruiting and hiring practices, our onboarding practices and induction programs for new staff, our professional development programs, and last but not least, our performance evaluation systems, to ensure that we had the most current and effective human resources programs and procedures in place. So an example of something that's coming out of this organizational systems strategic intent is the research into a new teacher and administrator evaluation system. The district has used the current one actually for well over 10 years. Currently use the 2006 Danielson model, which has been actually updated several times since that iteration. And so really looking at the various evaluation models that are out there, and finding one that promises to be the most efficient and effective lever for teacher growth and performance. For example, there are teacher evaluation systems out there that, as part of the system, involves student feedback as part of the evaluative process. The current system we use does not do that, but I think that could be a really powerful source of feedback and professional growth for teachers to have that incorporated actually into the performance evaluation system. But everything from our interviewing procedures, are we casting a wide net and a diverse net, if you will, to really work on diversifying our professional core, so that our professional core is not only more representative of our student body, but also more representative of the world and society at large. Climate and culture, right? So when I came in, even in my first partial year, I came in late March. It was apparent to me that students coming out of the pandemic and re-entering school, that we were seeing a greater incidence of let's call it antisocial behavior, which I think wasn't altogether unexpected, but I think to some extent it took us, right or wrong, took us a bit by surprise. And so the board and I, the board at the time and I were certainly in agreement that focusing on school culture and climate coming into last year, and then of course this year, was something that was really important. And it was important enough that, this became a strategic intent. But it's not simply about the culture within our schools, with our students. It's also our professional culture. It's our larger school district culture in terms of how do we engage with one another, right? Yeah, how do we ensure that we're having open civil discourse with one another about topics which are of importance to us? As an administration, we've aspired to to be open, to be transparent in our decision making, to avail ourselves to our community stakeholders, to build those bridges. And this was obviously something that was important. This year we launched our Live Holmdel Blue positive behavior initiative, and we've taken a number of steps this year in activating the first year of the plan in this particular strategic intent. My doctoral work was focused on parental involvement, in particular, and in my time working in the profession, whether it was doing parent universities and other districts, I've always known that a critical component to student success and school district success is meaningfully and consistently and constructively engaging parents in the school district. I recall a title of one of the articles that was part of my lit review, and it was parental involvement beyond the bake sale, right? And the premise is that we've involved parents historically in schools, but it has typically been in sort of fluffy, sort of superficial ways. So how can we move beyond that? And I think the strategic plan process was a great example and a great first step, if you will, in that direction of bringing parents and guardians to the table to actually be involved in the decision-making process, right? Through through the development of this plan. And explicit within this plan over the course of the 5 years are multiple opportunities to continue that, but also to find ways to systematize that, right? So it's not just something that's fly by night, but how do we create consistent, ongoing systems of parent engagement and involvement in our schools? And how do we meet parents and guardians where they are, right? We do a lot of things in the evening. Our attendance is not great. I don't blame parents for that. People are busy. There are a lot of competing priorities. How do we deliver programming in a modality that is accessible for parents to take advantage of? And I believe that it's incumbent upon the school district to find ways to meet parents and guardians where they are, in order that we can provide them with that information, whether that's about how they can better support their children at home, how they can protect their children online, and whatever the case may be. But there's another piece to this intent, which is really critical, and that's how do we build partnerships, not only with our parents, but with our community, at large community, not only in Holmdel, but within the county, within the state, to really enhance and augment our programming and our offerings to students. We've begun that process at the high school with the starting of internship programs. We have some great industry partnerships in our engineering and our architecture classes. But how do we really expand on that significantly to the point of where we get to a point where every student has had an opportunity to participate in some sort of an internship or a field-based experience prior to when they graduate from our high school. And last but certainly not least is the strategic intent of teaching and learning. I would argue that this particular intent has two branches. One of them is focused on really augmenting and innovating what we currently offer, right? The second one is not as it's not as headline worthy, but it's no less important, which is again going back to that the pandemic, going back to maybe some transition that occurred in the uppermost echelons of the administration, what I observed when I came in is that we have some really outstanding pockets of practice, right? But what we also have is a fair degree of inconsistency in and really ensuring that a student's experience, regardless of the school or the teacher or the course, that there's a consistency there. And so that started when I first came in ensuring that we had consistent expectations and format for lesson plans. And it's really moved more into the area of assessment. Last year, which was not part of the strategic action plan, we put together grade-based grading committees, level-based grading committees, school-based grading committees, if you will. And my charge to the committees was basically, and to Dr. Irwin, who was chairing those committees, was look, we're going for low-hanging fruit, if you will, this year. We're not looking to make major changes, but we're looking to make changes that are going to bring some degree of consistency. And so what we did was we ensured, whereas, for example, at the high school, there was a tremendous amount of variety, even within departments, of the percentage of each category. We established consistency in those categories. The category percentages were not changed drastically, and in fact, in some cases, the weightings were favorably changed. But it was important that there was consistency from course to course, and and classroom to classroom. We had initially intended to last year to make changes to the grading scale, but we had presented these prospective changes at 2 consecutive committee of the whole meetings. I think it was actually over the course of the summer, maybe towards the end of the school year, over the course of the summer, and we did receive a fair amount of feedback from parents that there were concerns about changing the grading scale. And so we walked that back, and that you'll see that reflected within the strategic plan is that we do intend to take another look at the grading scale at the high school, but would not foresee making any changes to that until we had an opportunity to canvass our stakeholders on that. But really, it's about bringing consistency in our teacher practice, from class to class, course to course, and bringing innovation and augmentation to our programming. So you can just see that, under each particular task force, you can see that it is organized by, and all this information has been shared multiple times with the school district community. It is posted on the district website in the event that you wish to peruse it on your own time. But you can see that there are, for many of the action steps, there are timestamps, if you will, or time horizons that are established for each one of them. And the district goals for this particular school year for the district, you'll see one of those goals is, I think it's the final goal, is that we will have accomplished all of the action steps within this plan that were tagged for completion in year 1. And again, I'm not going to go point by point, but you can see under the organizational systems, updating all job descriptions. Most of our job descriptions, we have some job descriptions, excuse me, that have not been updated since the mid-90s. So that's critical that all of our job descriptions are updated to align with the current roles and responsibilities of our staff. Reviewing and updating all of our school employee handbooks is an example of another step. And finally is for action step 3 under this is the implementate. We have a teacher induction program now. It is essentially a 1-year teacher induction program. We're looking to expand that to a 3-year program that sort of has kind of gradually sort of increasing expectations. We're in the process now of just doing some research into some best practices at districts, best practice district programs around which we might want to model our own. As we get into the task force of teaching and learning, one of the action steps that really jumps out to me is really important, and which we're doing this year, is establishing transition teams, to really look at how we're preparing students as they transition from one school to the next, and how are we really being thoughtful and intentional about that preparation in order that students transition, from Village to Indian Hill to SATS, and so on and so forth, are as successful as possible. We also are taking a look at all of our schedules. It's not to say that we're necessarily going to be changing our school schedules, but like any program or schedule model, it is best practice from time to time, certainly after 4 or 5 years, to be evaluating that schedule to ensure that it is giving us, we're maximizing our instructional time, and that schedule still meets the needs of our students and our school community. One of the things that came out, I just want to point to 2.5. One of the things that emerged from our surveys that were administered were actually, what's really interesting coming from students, was the idea of feedback, constructive feedback from teachers, and the sense that the feeling that there were not that wasn't adequate, right? They weren't getting good, consistent, rich feedback on their work. And so you can see, to form school level committees to research and implement age appropriate tools for students at all levels to reflect on current performance and set individual goals, including but not limited to student-led conferences. So I think I point that out because I think that's a really good example of a specific action step that really emerged very directly from the feedback that we received from students in the surveys. You look at 3.1, and this is explicitly stated in one of our district goals this year, is to continue to focus on increasing our AP participation at the high school. This is also tangent to rankings. I would argue that the primary factor, which is sort of resulting in Holmdel High School sort of plateauing amongst comprehensive public high schools, excluding county vocational schools, we're in the low 30s statewide rank. And one of the factors is what they call our college readiness index, which is directly connected to the percentage of our students who take AP courses. We have somewhere that between 50 and 60% of our students, I think it's 54 or 55% of our students who take AP courses, and yet we have 96% of our students, if not higher, that attend either a 4-year or 2-year college. So sort of the premise is if you're heading to an institution of higher learning, one could make the assertion that it's appropriate for you to have had a college course experience in high school. So we've baked that into the plan. It's in our district goals. And we're focused on increasing that percentage, and by proxy, our state rankings, which are going up, and they have been going up incrementally. There has been forward momentum, but if we want to really jump, and we get that number to 70, I think we'll see our rankings increase significantly. Another 3.2 is a good example of a piece of feedback that came to us out of our parent and guardian surveys, was really the desire for a richer set of offerings at the elementary schools, for extracurricular offerings. So that's an example of an action step, again, that emerged directly from the feedback that we received from parents. You can see that the teaching and learning intent is pretty hefty. again, I don't want to, I could talk all night on it. Just going to kind of tease out some things here. Just want to hover over 5.5 for a moment. You know, I want to, hit you with too many acronyms here. But 5.5 relates to MTSS, which is referred to as the multiple tiered system of supports, previously known as RTI, or response to intervention. This is sort of the next generation, if you will, of the old fashioned INRS, or intervention and referral services teams. We had an MTSS program in place when I got here. But last year, Dr. Irwin and Mrs. Lamogli, our Director of Special Services, along with Denise Rubel, who oversees the supplemental programs department, engaged in a year-long process of evaluating our current program, doing site visits to a number of school districts that had really well-developed and mature programs. And this year implemented a new set of procedures, not only on the teacher side, but also more user-friendly forms for parents. We've held evening sessions for parents so they can better understand the types of supports that we offer, and the process if their child is performing below grade level and is in need of support. Again, culture and climate. Year one was really to implement our district-wide positive behavioral support program, our Live Holmdel Blue program. We will build on that in subsequent years, where we take it from the school level and we start to bring it down to the classroom level. Where I've seen these positive behavioral programs fail is when they make that transition to the classroom level, because we have to be really thoughtful about what that looks like, when it's happening, how it's happening, how we're training teachers to do it, but by the same token, not overly compromising instructional time that's focused on other things. So that is, as part of this plan, it will eventually, you can see, inclusion in the 2024-25 school district budget to fund professional development. So 24-25 will be next year. We will spend a year contemporaneously with continuing to build and promote our school-based programs. We will spend an entire year just preparing teachers to implement a classroom-based model, which will be implemented in the following school year. Okay, just I guess I'm about, oh wow, 38 minutes in, so I'm going to wrap this up so we can do questions. And finally, it's just our family and community engagement. You can see a number of the things that I mentioned previously, creating a database of potential community partners, expanding our internship opportunities for students. And as importantly, is really taking a hard look at the way we communicate, right? Myriad of modalities have sort of evolved over the course of the last, let's call it 10 to 15 years. It used to be the website, and then it was email and school messenger and social media, and you have communications coming from principals, and you have communications from your child's teacher, and you have communications coming from me. And that's just the school stuff. That doesn't include your stuff, for your professional life and for your personal life. And so really gathering feedback on how we can improve and streamline that. And so this month, later this month, and then again in December, we'll be holding 2 parent guardian focus groups on communication to drill down on some of these specific action steps. We'll be taking a real-time walk through the website to gather feedback from our parents on how where they think it's ineffective, what's good about it, what's not, to really ensure that our communications are as tight and clear and consistent as possible. Also part of this, and I feel is worthy of mentioning, is working with our parents and guardians, also with our internal stakeholders, to really codify our chain of command, and really provide clarity and guidance for parents on, okay, you have a concern, you have an issue. How do you approach that? What are the proper steps? And not only what are the proper steps, but what are some sort of helpful hints and tips on sort of how to navigate each of those levels, if you will. And that will also be done internally. But in the end, it's founded on the idea that, and the expectation, really, I say expectation really more internally, because I can say that comfortably, that I certainly can expect certain behaviors of the employees. Would hope that it would occur on the parent side as well, is, trust the process, right? Until the process fails you, and understand that if the process does fail you, that next level of the chain of command is there, right? And I've said it, from the time I got here, if a concern comes to me, and I've said this to the staff as well, I will evaluate it objectively. If I feel that our process is sound, then I will handle it accordingly. But if I feel our process has not been sound, then I will judge that accordingly, and I will advocate for the parent or the child if I feel that the process or the system has failed the child. But really providing parents with clarity on that process and how to best approach it, to obtain the outcome that you're looking for. And finally, is just really, when I talk to parents, I am a parent. I think one thing is consistent, which is that I think we all recognize, some of the inherent challenges of being a parent nowadays, right? I think social media and social media use and technology use is one, I think, which all parents have concerns about, right? And I think parents appreciate when we provide resources and educational opportunities, to help inform parental practice, right? But if we only get 10 or 15 parents at an event, what have we really accomplished? So really, how do we, as I mentioned before, on these high interest, high importance topics, how do we package it in such a way where it's convenient and accessible to our parents and guardians? And this is just a final, is just the, all the community members and staff members, administration, who played a role in this process, either as serving on the district core team or served on one of the planning task forces. And so with that, I will pause.
Thank you, Dr. Cascone. I personally feel very spoiled to have you here walking us through this. I think most parents in the district have seen this plan, we've read through it, but to have you walk through us with it was really wonderful. So thank you.
You're very welcome.
I also have to say the GRIT acronym and just these terms of excellence, you're speaking our language here in Holmdel. Love it. And we did have some very thoughtful questions emailed into us ahead of time by parents who are at events with multiple children tonight and then able to tune in. And I have to say, you were so thorough that your presentation really did answer most of them. I have that in front of me. Okay. So thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
All right, so let's go into the Q&A. And then if we have time, I'll go through some of the questions that were emailed. The first question that was written in, and if you have questions, it's not too late, keep typing them into the Q&A. The first one says, what is involved in a teacher induction program?
Yeah, so the teacher induction program, more commonly known as like teacher orientation. Your orthodox teacher orientation program is we bring our new staff in, certificated staff, in usually towards the end of the summer, usually the week or two before the opening of the school year, and we put them through a multi-day program with everything from, um, training on HIV, to getting them oriented to our technology systems, to designated time with their curricular supervisor to walk through curricular documents. We give them a bus tour of Holmdel too, which is that was a real crowd pleaser. They really enjoyed that. And I had a brush up on my Holmdel history as I did it this year, um, but it's a lot of information in a relatively short period of time. And not unlike, the common criticisms of ineffective professional development is that it's sort of this idea of one-off, right? So the idea is that, effective teacher induction needs to be job embedded and it needs to be ongoing. And so that's really the idea of a 3-year program, is that you're providing uh, uh, ongoing training and trainings that maybe ramp up gradually in complexity, and also in a level of expectation, because in addition to this being a means to prepare and train teachers, it's also a means by which to evaluate teachers, right? And so some teacher induction programs have, for example, in year 3, not 4, because their 4th year is their tenure year, is the completion of some form of an action research project in year 3, um, through which they can demonstrate, a number of different things, from, scholarship to initiative, identifying a student achievement issue in the district. Um, so, it's really the purpose is twofold: training, upskilling, but also means to evaluate the teacher's skill and ability.
Very smart. Thank you. All right. So since you mentioned that evaluation, let's jump to a question. You talked about incorporating student feedback in this new evaluation way of evaluating. So someone's asking, if student feedback is involved in teacher evaluation, how can teachers be protected from angry students?
Yeah, so one of the one system that I know that utilizes student feedback is the James Strong model. And the student feedback is its role, or its place in the evaluation, is as a data set to inform teacher reflection, right? So pretty much all teacher evaluation systems typically have a domain that's focused on professionalism and reflection, right? Reflectiveness, if you will. And it's really incorporated into that, right? So it's really the evaluation piece of that is that it's sort of reviewed collaboratively between the supervisor and the staff member to sort of identify valid and reliable trends that are sort of emerging from that data set, um, as opposed to, say, you might have a student or two that maybe have sour grapes over something, or there might have been an interpersonal block or something like that. But that in of itself would not translate into a negative score. It just becomes a rich data set from which teachers can reflect and say, okay, you know what, 75% of the students said that they would have liked more opportunities for student reflection. Beautiful. That becomes a great focus for professional development, for that teacher moving forward into the next year.
Okay, thank you. All right, our next question is, what are you most proud of during your first 2 years?
Most proud of? Oh. I think that when I came to Holmdel, and it was a similar story in all districts, right? Coming out of the pandemic, the pandemic had been a very stressful and tumultuous and even divisive time. And so, being able to, in collaboration with the board, with the community, with the staff, to really kind of move the district beyond that phase, if you will, into a place where I'm heartened, by the feedback I received from a lot of folks, community members, students, staff, who say, you know what, we really feel like we're moving in the right direction, right? And we really feel like there's a level of, on the staff side, a level of support. From the community side, we really feel like there's that you're listening, and that you're present. And so to have maybe gotten to the community mindset into a more positive place, than where it was, 18 months ago, is probably that which I'm most proud of.
That is indeed an achievement. Okay, we're moving on to grading systems. Here's a question. What is the motive behind changing grading systems? And with the committee of the whole, will the committee of the whole format, how will parents contribute to this discussion? There was a follow-up. Let's see if I can incorporate that. Because you mentioned that you would be taking another look at that.
Mhm.
So, in taking another look at that, when will community feedback be incorporated?
Yeah. So the motive behind the sort of like the first version 1.0, or like the first wave of changes, was really all about consistency. It was that, we had vast disparities, in, from even within the same department, a course might have, it was sort of idiosyncratic, based upon the instructor. So that was really about consistency. In terms of the grading scale, presently, and I think when we talk about scales, we're really talking about the high school. That's where it seems to be, there seems to be the most, I think people are most invested. Students, parents, teachers alike are probably most invested in discussions on the scale at the high school. Presently, there are no minuses or pluses, in the high school grading scale. It's just straight, straight letter, right? Um, and as part of our sort of research, as we looked at, um, the high schools that are ranked above us, so, and then not just on their grading scale, but we looked at those groups. Okay, what are those schools that are schools 33 through number 1? And I'm talking about public comprehensive high schools. I'm not talking about the Vokes, because to me that's apples and oranges. I'm talking about schools that are like us. And what are they doing? What are their practices? We have a very unusual grading scale. It's extremely uncommon, right? So, and so it becomes a question of, kind of student motivation in terms of like shooting for that plus. Now, the offset, the downside of that is that will that contribute to, you know, um, a culture of greater angst for students, right? I mean, I think that in some level that was part of the rationale for why we did away with that. But more to your question about parents, I think what we realized when we were making these recommendations in the end of last year, is that, we had a number of parents come to our committee meetings, as well as email us with concerns over that. And that's why we put a pause to it. We said, obviously we had a blind spot there, would pause it. So, our plan would be that, any proposed changes, if in fact there are proposed changes, I would communicate that, to the parent community, in one of my letters in advance of the committee of the whole meeting, so that parents are aware of the fact that that was going to be a topic of conversation at the meeting. And so that if they felt compelled to come and listen or to provide feedback, they were aware that that was in fact going to be discussed.
Okay, great. I can tell you as a mother of a 6th grader that I have that plus means something to him. He's always striving for that plus. So you kind of touched on the next question, actually. It says, the committee of the whole, what are your thoughts on this structure and how can we make it easier for community members to follow? Right now, it's not clear what is being worked on. And you kind of touched on that, saying you could send a letter, saying what might be on the agenda.
Yeah.
To add to that.
So yeah, the committee. So just to kind of do a little bit of compare and contrast between the subcommittee structure and the committee of the whole. I would argue that, it was the community had even less idea of what we were working on when we were in subcommittees, because there was there was no agenda that was posted publicly for those meetings prior to when they occurred, and the only artifacts of that meeting that were for public consumption were the minutes that were created out of the meeting and that were subsequently posted. Different from that with the committee of the whole, there is a committee of the whole agenda that's posted 48 hours prior to the actual meeting. And it does list, those items which will be discussed under new business or old business. And then following the meeting, specifically the department updates, which are provided during that committee of the whole as sort of a standing agenda item, are then also posted to the district website. And I have begun to include both the video of the committee of the whole meeting as well as the department updates in my weekly letter. So I do think, it can contribute to a greater degree of community transparency. The challenge of compressing, 4 subcommittee meetings into one committee of the whole meeting and ensuring that, we're engaged in as in-depth a treatment of these topics, I think continues to be a work in progress. I think we're better at it now than we were when we first started. And I do think, from on the administrative side, there's an efficiency there. I mean, I would be out of my lane to offer what the board might think of it. But I do think, on the administrative side, it is a positive that we're able to give the information to all the board members simultaneously. I can say that in the subcommittee structure, there was a lot of sort of subsequent sort of filling in and, and briefing. Whereas in this, everyone gets the same information at the same time. I think it's just a matter of like, how do you, and you might have seen, if anybody's been paying attention, we've already started to splinter off back into some subcommittees. Like we have a policy subcommittee now. And there's some discussion about creating like a quarterly ad hoc curriculum committee. So, which I think is how do I say this, is almost a sort of a reaction. It's sort of a reaction to the complexity of trying to combine some committees into one committee of the whole meeting, right? Sort of leading back to some ad hoc committees, because we're recognizing that we can't necessarily get all the mileage we need out of that committee of the whole meeting. But I definitely think we're doing a much better job of it now, administratively than we did when we first started.
Good to hear. Thank you. The next question, kind of a fun question. What needs the single most attention in our school system if money were no object? And how would you address this?
I would have to say and I noticed, I think we have our director of buildings and grounds on the meeting. So much to his chagrin, I'm not going to say facilities. Our facilities are in great shape. But I would say mental health services supports. I would hire a cadre of school counselors, and we have 2 clinicians right now, which were part of Rutgers. We've onboarded them. They're our employees now. Probably at least 2 more. So one per school, and more counselors. Right, lower that student to counselor ratio. I think that is one of the most glaring deficiencies, although our counselors, I would argue, do as good a job as they can in trying to, for example, in our elementary schools, servicing 700 students or 350 students, but it would be investing in additional counseling and mental health supports for our students.
Okay. It's very interesting you said that, because one of the questions from home, I'll actually read that. It says, has there been any discussion around departmentalizing the guidance office at the high school level so that counseling and mental health services are separate from course selection college admissions?
It's an interesting question. I think one of the things, I think it's actually a really, for lack of a better word, neat idea. but I think the aforementioned challenge with the ratio would, right. Like, so if going back to the first question, like if I could double the number of counselors at the high school and have half of them be just simply academic counselors and half of them just be mental health counselors, done. Right. I think just with our current staff, I don't think we really have the luxury to do that. But, I think the inclusion of the clinicians, we've added social workers, we have a student assistance counselor. So we do have other resources for students, for that kind of assistance.
Thank you. All right, here's a question from someone who's done their homework. And quotes actually references the strategy 3 on page 23. Says provides families opportunities to acquire information, knowledge, and skills to support their child's education at home and at school. So what types of information would you be looking for?
Well, I think to some extent, also in the plan is the intention to gather feedback from our parents on the topics which are of most need to them. Some of the things we've already done is offering parent information sessions on MTSS, offering parent information sessions on supporting literacy development at home, offering parents resources for how to ensure that their children are safe online and how to make informed decisions about when to buy a cell phone and smartphone, and if you do, some of the precautions you can take before that happens. So I think that those are a few, but I think that that is sort of remains to be seen and is going to be largely driven by, but I should say equally driven by when we survey our parents, the kinds of topics on which they feel they need the most support.
Thank you. Okay, getting into some hard questions here. I understand that anti-Semitic incidents appear to be on the rise, specifically at Indian Hill. How are you addressing this? And shouldn't this be something that is more readily communicated to parents?
Yes. So a group of concerned community members corresponded with me last week, and sort of inquiring the same. It was a very thoughtful communication with some really good questions. And as I've stated publicly, I can absolutely understand our Jewish community members, as well as our Muslim and Arab community members, um, worries, right? With what's currently going on in our world, in our country, um, and I'm in the process of developing a fairly comprehensive response to that correspondence, which I do believe those folks will find reassuring when they actually learn of the various things we're doing. Before I go into any more detail, I will say that notwithstanding, I think a lot of really important work that's going on in the district, I also do understand that there's always more work to be done, right? And that our schools on some level are a microcosm of our larger society. And in spite of what our messaging might be, in spite of what truly is a zero tolerance policy to hate speech or bias related offenses, that that we have to be always on guard for that, because those things can occur, and we have to be extremely vigilant about it. I think it's a multi-pronged approach to how to deal with it. I will say that I did, in the wake of that correspondence, I did convene. I have my bi-weekly meeting with principals, and that was the top of the agenda. And I asked for the principals to report out to me on, because I had not heard of any incidents that had made it up to my level. And I said, am I mistaken, or have there been reported incidents of anti-Semitism in our schools? The only school that a principal indicated to me that there had been a reported incident of anti-Semitism to the administration was at SAT school. And I was surprised to learn that that particular offense was actually committed by a Jewish student against another Jewish student. Now, I'm not suggesting that in the quiet recesses of the cafeteria or in the hallways that may be occurring. It may be occurring. I'm not suggesting it's not, but what I am imploring our parents and or our students is that if any student, if that kind of speech, is ever uttered to you in our schools, we need to be made aware of that immediately. We will not absolutely address that immediately according to our policies, according to the state codes and state federal statutes, and we do. So that would be my message: is that no student should come to our school feeling unsafe. No student should come to our school and be subject to discrimination or bias. And we will act on any of those incidents immediately and with the full force of our code of conduct and our district policies. When we talk about this positive behavioral supports program, it's all connected to that, right? We're trying to create a district and school culture where those are our consistent values and they are upheld by all our students. And I would suggest the vast majority of our students are really, really conscientious citizens of our school community. Our curriculum, we are, I think, one of the few school districts that have a required course in 8th grade, which is called Standing Up to Intolerance, which is a really incredible course that I think at a really critical juncture in students' lives, gives them a really instructive experience on not being spreaders of hate and things of that nature. Our curriculum is fully aligned with the Holocaust mandates as outlined in the New Jersey Student Learning Standards. And more recently, we've sort of turned our view to how can we better prepare teachers to manage difficult conversations in the classroom when appropriate or when necessary. More recently, we did share a host of resources with our teachers, which were then reviewed by supervisors in department meetings. And we are in the process of developing a homespun version of the Anti-Defamation League's No Place for Hate program. So even while we feel confidently about the things we're currently doing, we do also understand that we need to continue to improve and grow and develop our ability to address these kinds of behaviors in our schools.
Thank you. So I think a lot of what you just said is applicable to the next question, but I'll go ahead and read it in case there's anything you want to add. Someone is asking, how does the recent repeal of policy 5756 fit into the emphasis on culture and climate of Holmdel Blue?
Well, I think, my message, which I stated, I don't know if it was at the first meeting, the first reading of the repeal or the second reading of the repeal, was really my assurance to our students and our families that we were going to continue to, in other words, the way that we've managed situations like this in the past, as per the law, we were going to continue to handle them that way, right? When a student comes to a school counselor with a sensitive issue, and it may be related to gender identity, and it may be related to something else, and they express at that moment in time, for whatever reason, a reluctance to share that information with their parent or guardian, we immediately begin sort of a dialogue with the student in a process through which we attempt to build that bridge between the student and their parent and guardian. That is always the goal of a school counselor. And a school counselor has both a ethical responsibility to do no harm, but also an ethical responsibility to involve the parent, right? So it's sort of this, the counselors are caught between the Scylla and Charybdis of those two ethical principles. And I think what we concluded is that when, you know, after a period of time, and let's say it's 2 weeks or 3 weeks, where the child is still reluctant, is that's a time when the mental health professionals, the counseling staff, need to be collaborating, right? Combining and collaborating with expertise to say, you know, what's at root here, and how can we get to the end game of bridging that gap? Because that schism that exists between the child and the parent, I would argue, ultimately, is not healthy for the child, right? For the child to feel as if they're sort of a stranger in their own home and they can't confide in their parents. Ultimately, the child, I think, the child's mental health is, will be better off, if you will, if that can be positively brought to the parent and guardian, but also being mindful that if the child has a trepidation, how can we work through that? As far as that more global question, all I can tell you is that the administration and the teaching staff, every day we walk into our schools, um, aspire to be welcoming and supportive of our students. You know, from the superintendent on down to the classroom teacher, you know, to ensure that no student feels isolated, and every student feels valued. And so with the repeal of the policy, that's not going to change my MO with students. It's not going to change, you know, the principal's MO or our teachers. Every student, we're going to make a concerted effort to make sure that every student feels valued and supported every day they come to our schools.
Thank you. Right, so this next question kind of touches on some of CELU's mission, which is development and land use. It's talking about asking what is a typical class size in Holmdel, and does Holmdel have a plan for expansion as more and more houses and townhomes are built? Some of which we have kept from being built. I will put that in.
Yeah, I was gonna say, hopefully you guys can put the kibosh on this. Well, I mean, presently, I would say our class size is still very good. You know, on the elementary level in a village school, um, it's very rare that we have a class in grades 2 and 3 that's more than 23 students. And when we start to get into the primary grades, most of our classes are 20 students and below, which is very good. You know, it's a little bit of a different dynamic when you start to get up into the middle schools, just because there's more course offerings and things of that nature. As far as expansion, you know, I can be frank that presently there are really no conversations about expanding our schools. But I actually would be interested in maybe syncing up with you offline if you have any kind of you know, data as far as prospective developments and what those prospective impacts might be on enrollment. I would love to be privy to that information.
Well, that is something that we analyze every time we're looking at a prospective project and following it. How is this going to impact our schools? And so we're very cognizant of that and following that, with each and every project that comes up before the planning board, the zoning board, just on our radar in general. Okay, so the next question, you kind of touched on this a little bit when you were speaking about looking at those schools in the top 30, seeing what they do with their grading policy. But this person is asking what research went into changing the grading policy to a 75%, 25%, or 85%, 15% honor/AP major/minor weight, and what consideration was given to students who struggle with testing?
Yeah, so when you look at what we did, I want to offer up as a point of contrast what the changes that were made to Indian Hill. When you look at Indian Hill, you know, and SATs, you see that there were 3 categories. There was a major assessment, a minor assessment, and then that kind of catch-all category, which would include homework and, participation. At the high school, traditionally there were only two categories, which was, assuming it was major assessments, and then you had a second category which tended to be worth more of the grade. The intention is that within say that 85%, right, that is not simply tests, right? It's tests, it's quizzes, it's projects, it's presentations, it's essays, it's labs, right? So being frank, I had a long conversation with Dr. Irwin about this. And I said, well, I would love to see next year at the high school for us to adopt a similar breakdown as we have in the lower schools, where it's delineated, where that one monolithic category is broken up into two smaller ones, because I think it gives greater clarity and direction for teachers as to where to put that myriad list of assignments or exercises that I just gave you. It enables them to sort of categorize them more readily. I think what's happening now is all of those things are included in major assessments, but they are being entered into that major category with different weights, right, depending upon their scope, right? So a test is obviously going to have a greater weight within that major assessment category than, say, a quiz. But for me, and what I shared was that enters a level of subjectivity, right, which then lends to a level of inconsistency, which we were trying to avoid. So my guidance was clear, is that our supervisors need to go back to our teachers because at this point to completely change back to three categories midstream would probably be chaotic. But we have to, in essence, do that without doing it, meaning that we have to have clarity within the department of, within that major assessment category, what is really a major and what is really a minor, and then having consistent weights for each of those types of assessments for that course. So a quiz has a consistent weight in the course, teacher to teacher. An essay has a consistent weight. And I would argue that the disparity between the weighting between a major test and those other, we'll call them minor majors, needs to be a bit narrower, because best practices in assessment are that students are being given varied opportunities to demonstrate their skills and their knowledge. And that's particularly appropriate when you get into the more of the humanities-based classes, where you have, you're testing a variety of things: reading, writing, comprehension, public speaking. So we did hear the feedback. That drove a really, I would argue, really productive conversation with the curriculum director, and informed falling somewhere between a directive and a recommendation, to go back to the departments and ensure that the supervisors are having follow-up conversations with teachers to bring greater consistency and clarity as to how we're weighting these range of assignments that fall under the category of major assessment. So the idea, like, if a kid isn't good on tests, well, there are other opportunities within that 85% other than just tests. So we are cognizant of the feedback that's been coming out, and we are trying to course correct without completely upsetting the apple cart by changing it again mid-year. But I think the community could expect that moving into next year, this is just me speaking as a superintendent, I'd like to see us establish three categories: that as major, which is essentially your tests, if you will, or other things as well, depending upon their scope; minor, and then that category for participation. But final point, I also asked for Dr. Irwin to conduct a grade distribution analysis from the first marking period of this year versus the first marking period of last year, to get a sense of, are we seeing a significant variance in grade distributions with the that change.
Okay, thank you for the clarification. All right, let's maybe fit 2 or 3 more questions in because it's getting a little bit late. You spoke in the strategic plan about helping students transition from one school to the next. And this question has to do with the start times, which is all a buzz right now.
It is?
It is. So what are your thoughts on the changing of school start times, specifically the impact on Indian Hill students starting at 7:30 a.m.? So you have children transitioning from Village with a close to 9 a.m. start, students that have been at Indian Hill with a close to 9 a.m. start, all of a sudden now an hour and a half earlier. This person is concerned that that student population may have been overlooked in the analysis. What can you say to them?
Well, the first thing I would say is and I've already, received a few emails and gotten some good feedback. I wouldn't say that anyone's been overlooked, right? Because nothing's been determined, right? This was sort of the proposal. I'm looking forward to really getting that feedback from parents, to understand, what their experience is, right? I think when it was done, the idea was this, that it would, in addition to obviously addressing the early start time at the middle school and the high school, where we know students tend to have the heaviest academic loads. We know some students are balancing part-time jobs. Some students are balancing heavy academic load, part-time jobs, and maybe, a varsity athletic or a really heavy commitment in a theatrical performance. And also that those are the key years, although some say the years start as early as 10, it's really those adolescent years, not only when, that sleep is most critical, but also where we find students, the statistics show that students are more apt to develop resulting, mental health challenges and things of that nature. So that was the driver behind the later start time at the high school and the middle school. One of the benefits that we saw with the separate start times at Indian Hill and Village School was to address an age-old conundrum here in Holmdel, which is parents who have children at both schools having to get students to school, simultaneously at 2 different
I'm
schools.
one of those.
Right. So that was a positive as we saw it. Another positive as we saw it was, this idea of really being able to provide our Indian Hill students with more opportunities after school, for after school clubs. It would open up the opportunity for, students, 6th grade students, beyond wrestling to participate in middle school athletics, even middle school theatrical productions. And so that was another benefit. The idea of starting earlier is that, our younger students, and I have gotten some feedback from folks and saying, well, listen, our kids are really involved with, some of our students are participate in town athletics or club athletics. Even at that age, they have practice late at night and things of that nature. So, through the feedback, we're getting good information that can help inform that approach. Ultimately, we're going to consider all of that. And not that this is a driver. This is not the driver of the planning. But if we did go to this particular plan, the district would realize a significant savings of upwards of $500,000, if not more, in transportation costs, which we could recommit to other things, like, for example, addressing where necessary class size. But we also are not suggesting that we would sacrifice, the well-being of students, for economic savings. We are looking at an alternate possibility. If what we find is that the concern and the feedback is such that this is not a sustainable proposal, would be to have SATS and the high school on the same time and Indian Hill and Village on the same time. But that would be, in conversations with our director of transportation, would be an extremely complex bidding process for transportation. Our ability to actually secure transportation, which is simply those two tiers. Actually, it wouldn't even really be a true two-tier because we would need more buses in the second tier than we would in the first. And it would very likely be a more costly transportation endeavor. So as in my letter today to the community, I just ask for calm, understanding that we're not going to make any decisions in something as significant as this without obviously gathering community feedback, a lot of public conversation with the board before any final decisions are made.
Thank you. That segues nicely into one of our last two questions, talking about the school budget for the coming years. What could potentially affect it adversely? And do you see tax increases on the horizon for citizens?
Well, I mean, I think we've experienced just about, the last year's budget was about as bad as it, in terms of the increases in expenses, was probably about as bad as you could see, right? You had an exponential increase in transportation mid-budget cycle the previous year, which created a $2 million hole, which we, due to the fiscal responsibility of the district previously, we were able to fund out of fund balance, but then that created that deficit in fund balance. So whereas we previously carried over $2 million in fund balance to fund in part the budget for the following year, we're looking at somewhere in the neighborhood of like $600,000 or $700,000 in fund balance. You also had a significant increase in benefit costs. Those costs will likely stabilize for the upcoming year. But I think that the challenges of balancing budgets in public education are not going away, right? For this upcoming year, the district does still have $2 million in bank cap, and just not to go too far off on this one, but for those who are not familiar with bank cap is basically how do I explain it? It's not money per se, but it's the ability to go above 2%, which is the cap, by $2 million, right? So if we call $1 million a point, then you could theoretically levy 4% without a second question, without a referendum. And the way district accumulates bank cap is by coming in a point or two under the 2% in previous years. Our district was 0%, was I think 1%, 0%. So was banking, banked $1 million, $2 million, $4 million over 3 fiscal years in bank cap. Now, last year, the board did utilize some of that bank cap and could use it again, right? If you don't use bank cap within 3 years, you lose it, meaning that revenue is forever lost to your budget, to your overall budget. We're in the preliminary phases of developing the budget. So the extent to which the administration is going to be recommending to the board the use of bank cap remains to be seen. But I think the likelihood that a budget of 2% is going to be proposed, I think is very, very, very likely that we're looking at a 2 cap budget minimum for the upcoming year. But again, that is certainly not my decision to make. That's certainly a board level decision to make once we've brought them the proposal and they understand if we were to go in at 1% or a flat budget, what that would mean in terms of people and programs, because that's what it would mean. When you talk about cutting $2 million out of a budget. And I have to compliment Michael Patrizio in the business office, because they have, and previous boards have, really worked very diligently over the course of the last 5 or 6 years to realize efficiencies anywhere they could. Mm-hmm. And sometimes there's the perception that there's a lot of fat, there's a lot of pork in school district budgets. There really isn't. The majority of the budget is really salary and benefits. So, if you want to cut a couple $1 million, you got to look at people and programs.
Understood. Thank you. Right. Final question. Is the district actively exploring or piloting any continually emerging technologies such as AI to enhance the learning experience?
Our exploration of our treatment of AI right now is we're really coming at it first and foremost from a policy perspective, and just codifying in policy what our approach is to it, not only for students, but also for our professionals. It's amazing the way AI it was just like a tidal wave, like like it wasn't there, and then it was, but then all of a sudden it was like, wow, like here it is, and sort of scrambling now to develop policies to sort of manage it. I think the next step in that process is really looking at, once we've sort of codified how we foresee using it, is then how can we now begin to incorporate it into our curriculum. I would say if there's any adjustment that needs to be to our strategic plan, and we can modify it, is that I think there needs to be some inclusion of AI in our strategic plan, in the teaching and learning strategic intent. Teachers are dabbling with it, but it's certainly not in any kind of systemic way at this point.
Okay. Thank you. And Dr. Cascone, thank you for joining us. We know that you're a very busy man and you're working hard for our children in our community. And so we're grateful for this time with us to just help better inform us so that we can be better citizens and advocate for our children in our schools and our community. So thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you. So no matter where you live in Holmdel, there is a good chance that the work CELU volunteers have been doing for the past 25 years to protect our watershed, preserve our natural resources, and advocate for an open and transparent government has had a positive impact on your life. We will continue to do this important work. If you want to get involved in your community and meet some very nice people, we ask you to consider joining us. Alicia is going to give you some more information on our upcoming events and how you can get involved. Alicia.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Dr. Cascone, for joining us tonight and for creating this community conversation. It's so wonderful to have it right from you. We love to do informative sessions like this. We'd like you to continue to come and visit us as you have more information for us. And for anyone watching tonight, please visit us on our website at holmdel-celu.org. Or on our Instagram page or on our Facebook page. We're constantly updating with new and events for both children and adults alike. We just had a very successful reminiscent fossil hunt, which you may have seen, where we found lots of wonderful fossils and snakes even. We had a great Sip and CELU event in the summer, and we hope to do that again in the winter, so we meet more people that care more about conversations like the one we had with Dr. Cascone's this evening. Watch for our emergency preparedness program in January. And of course, you can always come to our annual Earth Day at Bayonet Farm if the weather holds out in May. And that's it. Please stay in touch with CELU, and we hope to see you at our next event. Thank you.
Good night, everyone.
Good night. Thank you.